Mediterranean, May 1954. A 21-gun salute for a new queen aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia. A demonstration of naval power, reminiscent of the origins of the British Empire. Warships of the line, guarding a sovereign queen across the oceans she rules. Queen Elizabeth II is at the end of a grand tour of her empire. But Britain's power is under threat like never before. India, the greatest of all its imperial possessions, has gone. In death, Mahatma Gandhi has become a symbol of hope for all those seeking independence. His words prophesying the end of empire to come.
If India becomes free, the rest will follow.
There will be no peace for Great Britain in Palestine. We've been betrayed by Britain. Therefore, we wage war upon you.
Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with total repression of the African continent.
Kuala Lumpur, 1945, at the end of the Second World War. Defeated Japanese troops are still at liberty on the streets. September the 13th, General Yusuri Ishiguro formally surrenders all Japanese forces in Malaya to British General Ouvrey Roberts. The British Empire in the Far East is restored. Empire troops march in celebration. Among them, men of the Malayan People's Anti-Japanese Army, who have fought as part of the empire. But within 3 years, many of these soldiers will be involved in a bitter struggle against British forces in an attempted communist takeover of Malaya. The British Empire will become embroiled in the Cold War. Winston Churchill, 1946.
In a great number of countries, far from the Russian frontiers, the Communist parties constitute a growing challenge to Christian civilization.
This is the permanent sentence.
The emergency in Malaya has been going on for over 3.5 years. I asked Mrs. Lucy how she managed.
They don't deserve any mercy. They have committed such terrible atrocities. They are just like wild beasts.
A radio interview with Joan Lucy, the wife of a plantation owner at the height of the Malayan emergency. The European owners of the vitally important rubber industry are an obvious target for the communist terrorists.
I was quite envious of my husband when he shot one the other day. I could in some way repay the death of my friends by getting 1 or 2 in return.
As the authorities round up more and more suspected communist sympathizers, the rebels retreat deeper and deeper into the Malayan jungle. Bruce Leeming, a 19-year-old lieutenant with the Highland Light Infantry, on his first jungle mission, April 1953.
Patrolling and sleeping in the jungle. Torrential rain, swamps, leeches, mosquitoes, prickly heat all over our skins. We haven't stopped sweating since we left Aden. I dream constantly of frost and snow. Oh, to walk free in the kilt again, instead of this clinging, sodden, jungle green kit.
British military operations are under the command of the High Commissioner, General Sir Gerald Templar.
I'm doing my level best to get a move on with the helicopters. We can now get our men, including the SAS, into primary jungle without any landing zone at all. I am determined to cut off the dragon's head, which lives deep in the jungle, not just stick pins into his behind.
The British pioneer the use of helicopters in jungle warfare. Over 45,000 Empire troops are deployed. Templar's strategy is to isolate the rebels from the local population.
The natives hold the key to the deep jungle. Without native food, the terrorists can't survive. The answer is not more and more troops into the jungle, but winning the hearts and minds of the Malayan people.
A costly and drawn-out campaign over 9 years leads to British victory. By 1957, the communist revolt is effectively at an end. Over 6,500 communist rebels are dead. Government dead number almost 2,500, including more than 500 British troops. In the same year, Britain grants Malaya its independence. The leader of Malaya's Democratic Alliance and its first Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman.
Whether we look to the east or to the west, we will always be friends with Great Britain.
In just 12 years, following victory in the Second World War, Britain's empire in the Far East has all but gone. Palestine, 1936, the Holy Land for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Palestine had been placed under British control after the First World War by a League of Nations mandate. In 1917, Foreign Minister Arthur Balfour had declared British sympathy with the idea of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Over the next 20 years, Jewish settlers pour into the country to escape discrimination elsewhere. David Ben-Gurion, a Jewish leader.
The Jewish problem was never as acute as in these days. The world is barred against us, and outside of Palestine, there is no hope to look forward to.
But Palestine has been an Arab land for centuries.
At present, there is the difficult question of the Arab tenant farmers and Bedouin. But by agreement with the Syrian government, it would be possible to transfer large numbers to northern Syria. The land there is cheap and plentiful.
The tide of refugees overwhelms the Palestinian Arabs as tens of thousands of Jews seek sanctuary in Palestine to escape persecution in Hitler's Germany. In April 1936, the Arabs rise in revolt against the growing number of Jewish immigrants. An open letter to British forces in Palestine from the leaders of the Arab revolt.
The cruelty is to try and deprive us of our homes and our honor, to give our lands to the Jews, who are expelled by all the civilized nations. We are your friends if you behave faithfully. We are men of dignity and valor. We will never betray you, but you are our enemy when you try to do us harm.
After attacks by the Arabs, the Jews arm themselves and fortify their settlements. The British send in extra troops. Major David Kennard, Coldstream Guards.
18th of October, 1936. After Lydda, the line twisted up the sides of the ravines. The scenery was fascinating, but no vegetation of any kind, just loose stones. One of the men was heard to remark, "Gor blimey, I thought that this was a land flowing with milk and honey. Well, as far as I can see, it's 15 men to a tin of milk and no bloody bees."
As the revolt continues, the British Army rounds up hundreds of Arab suspects.
The whole battalion cordoned Silwan. We searched it, finding 70 wanted men. One Arab woman was in a frenzy, tearing her hair and her garments. I stayed behind to help our informer. We had great difficulty getting away, as the women had rushed the prisoners and tried to lynch our informer.
Arab suspects are interned in detention camps. A young Arab leader.
In the old days, the Arabs never objected to the Jews. Nobody begrudged them the Wailing Wall and what it meant to them. But when the Jews became Zionists, it was a different matter. Now they are arrogant and aggressive. Our relationship with them is impossible.
The British High Commissioner in Palestine, Sir Harold McMichael, September 1938.
The position is deteriorating rapidly. This Arab revolt is an attempt to achieve the complete reversal of government policy regarding Jewish immigration.
With war looming against Germany, the British government does reverse its position. Britain will need its Arab allies and their oil. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, April 1939.
We are now compelled to consider the Palestine problem from the point of view of its effect on the international situation. If we must offend one side, let us offend the Jews rather than the Arabs.
The British decide to limit Jewish immigration so that a future Palestinian state will be controlled by an Arab majority. The Jewish settlers are left barricaded in their camps. Colonel Richard Meinertzhagen, a British officer who served in Palestine during the First World War.
The action of His Majesty's government in Palestine is very near to that of Hitler in Germany. We have dishonored our promises to the Jews. After 20 years of incredible effort in Palestine, the Jews are asked to abandon their national home at the bidding of Arab violence.
But it will be the violence of the Second World War which will change forever the history of Palestine. 6 million Jews will die in the Holocaust. For the survivors of the Holocaust, Palestine is their salvation. The Diary of a Polish Jew, a survivor of the death camps, part of the exodus of Jewish refugees to Palestine at the end of the war.
I am Gershon Rabinowicz from Krakow in Poland. From where I stand, Palestine looks like paradise. It is the first clear light I have seen in all my 17 years. It is hard to say what we see as our ship touches the promised land, for our eyes are filled with tears. Do you know what it is to be welcomed after a lifetime of being hated and hunted from land to land?
But the British are still trying to impose their pre-war policy to limit Jewish immigration. Many ships carrying Jewish refugees are turned away or have their passengers detained. John Watson, a soldier from Hampshire, serving in Haifa.
I tried to put myself into the position of one of those poor people who have suffered years of concentration camps, hunger and misery. Thousands on a tiny ship, within sight of the land they've dreamed of. Then, the British destroyers forced them aground and towed them off to captivity and more concentration camps.
By the end of 1945, British forces in Palestine are in the midst of a Jewish revolt, even more violent than the pre-war Arab revolt. The Jewish Defense Force, the Haganah, and its terrorist offshoot, the Stern Gang, try to force the British authorities to open Palestine to the thousands of Jews desperate to enter the country. Geula Cohen, a member of the Stern Gang.
There will be no peace for Great Britain in Palestine. Jewish fighters will strike for their people. We've been betrayed by Britain. Therefore, we condemn you. Therefore, we wage war upon you.
Here is the news. This is Richard Williams calling from Jerusalem. Saturday night, heavy firing broke out. Members of the Stern Gang had attacked 2 Arab houses, alleged to be snipers' posts. They succeeded in blowing them up.
Michael Lang, a British soldier serving in Palestine.
The Jewish terrorist group, the Stern Gang, have blown up the government admin wing of the King David Hotel, Jerusalem. 100 believed killed, many others injured. Casualties include Arabs, Jews, and British. There's something particularly obscene about indiscriminate murder by terrorists, posing as freedom fighters.
Despite escalating terrorist activity, the horror of the Holocaust has had a profound effect on world opinion, especially in America. There is little support for Britain's continued involvement. An unnamed British officer.
The people of Britain are tired and are not prepared for a row. They disapprove of British soldiers losing their lives and feel that the answer would be to clear out and leave the Jews and Arabs to settle the matter in their own way.
In September 1947, the British government surrenders its mandate in Palestine. Ernest Bevin, British Foreign Secretary.
We have decided that we are unable to impose a solution of our own. The only course now open to us is to submit the problem to the judgment of the United Nations.
All British troops will be withdrawn by the middle of 1948, but not before further bloodshed. Michael Lang.
Riots in Jerusalem. Burning of Jewish shops. Possible to see smoke from my window. Curfew now imposed in Arab areas. The Jews say they will be able to protect a new state and maintain order. The Arabs say to us, we have no argument with you. Go home, Inglesi, and we will push the Jews into the sea. What does the future hold? It looks bleak indeed.
14th of May, 1948. The new state of Israel is proclaimed under the leadership of Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion. The new Jewish state is immediately convulsed by war, with its own Arab population and its Arab neighbors, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Within 6 months, Israel's galvanized citizen army is victorious on all fronts. Over 6,000 Israelis die. Combined Arab losses total more than 15,000. "700,000 Palestinian Arabs flee the new state of Israel. Sabia Abu Latifa.
We wanted to flee before the Jews would recognize us. We were afraid they would shoot us. We only took a few clothes. We didn't think we'd go forever.
The Israeli army marches in victory. Britain's 30-year rule in the Holy Land has come to an ignominious end. Richard Meinertzhagen.
The British government has abandoned Palestine, same as in India. We have had to slink out, despised by all. We have left behind a hatred that will not die for generations. It is a glaring admission of failure, unprecedented in the history of our empire.
For 100 years, the British Empire in Africa had attracted adventurers and dreamers to its vast wilderness. Errol Whittle settled in East Africa after the Second World War.
Life in England may have become a highly organized business, but Africa never changes. With each day there comes some new enchantment, which grips the imagination. Vast plains with lakes and mountains, and always the sky's unresting clouds, sifting the sunlight across the hills and valleys.
For many, the British Empire in Africa is an opportunity to teach and to heal. Sister Mary Ignatius, Uganda, 1954.
Our life in Africa is very humble. We cherish the simplicities of life. We don't need much more. The joy we find, which makes our work so worthwhile, is brought by the children. They have so little, so few opportunities, and then to be struck by blindness, it's tragic.
As well as medicine and education, the British also bring Christianity. A Scottish missionary in Uganda in the 1950s, Gordon Robertson.
The heathen races of Africa are lost souls. They suffer because they have not heard the word of the Lord Jesus. The gospel is the only means by which they can be saved.
Thousands of teachers, doctors and missionaries devote their lives to serving the empire. Its sick and illiterate, and its supposed lost souls. The rolling hills of the Aberdare Mountains in Kenya are a home from home for many British settlers. They become known as the White Highlands. But they are also the home of the Kikuyu tribe. Gushu Gekoyo is a Kikuyu farmer.
I often ask myself why the British send their children all the way from home to a land that is not theirs. I have come to the conclusion that the white man is a thief by nature.
Cherry Lander, a widow who runs her own farm on the foothills of Mount Elgon, is a coffee pioneer.
There would never have been any Kenya if there hadn't been settlers, tough enough to endure the first awful years. They have given Kenya their youth, knowing that they could make nothing of it in their short lifespan. But they were building a future for their children and their children's children.
Gushu Gekoyo becomes a follower of Jomo Kenyatta, the leader of the Kenya African Union, who is campaigning for independence.
At a meeting in Thika, Kenyatta asked us whether we want to fight for our land. We replied, yes. Are you waiting then until the white man has bred into this country like rabbits? No, we replied. We want to fight now. Then realize that the tree of freedom is red, not with water, but with blood.
Kenyatta becomes the figurehead for Kenya's nationalism, but behind him, a much more radical movement emerges, Mau Mau. (1951). The King's African Rifles patrol the thick forests of the White Highlands as Kikuyu resentment at the occupation of their land escalates into armed rebellion. The rebels express their loyalty to the cause through a blood ritual, the Mau Mau Oath. Gruesome stories about the oath-taking ceremony are so potent that British filmmakers recreate them as propaganda. But Mau Mau sympathizer Josiah Karaoke recalls the fearsome words of his own oath.
I will obey all orders of the Mau Mau, or this oath will kill me. If I'm called in the night and I refuse to come, this oath will kill me. If I'm told to bring in the head of a white man and I refuse, this oath will kill me.
Over 100,000 Kikuyu take the Mau Mau Oath. Sir Michael Blundell, the leader of Kenya's white settlers.
October the 20th, 1952. The governor asked to see me in his room at Government House. There he told me that a declaration of emergency had been made and that a battalion of the army would be arriving in Kenya by air. He outlined the arrangements for the arrest and detention of 187 of the ringleaders of Mau Mau, including Kenyatta.
In December, Kenyatta is put on trial. By now, Mau Mau has begun to attack and kill white settlers. After 4 months in court, the presiding judge, Ransley Thacker, himself a white settler, delivers a damning 7-hour judgment.
You have plunged many Africans back to a state which shows little humanity. Your Mau Mau society has slaughtered without mercy defenseless men, women, and children. You have much to answer for, and for that you will be punished.
Kenyatta is sentenced to 7 years hard labor. Thacker flies to Britain immediately after the trial, having been given £20,000 by the government to facilitate his permanent relocation in England. March 1953. The worst atrocity of the Mau Mau uprising takes place at Lari, a protected settlement of Kikuyu loyal to the British, north of Nairobi. 97 people are burned or hacked to death. The government report of the massacre.
The sleeping Kikuyu people awoke to find flames roaring above them as the Mau Mau fired the tinder-dry thatched roofs. Men, women and children, forcing their way out of the windows, were caught and butchered. Mangled corpses all mingled with the smoking ashes of the burnt homesteads.
White farmers and their families continue to be attacked under the cover of darkness on their isolated farms. The wife of a farmer, Marjorie Perham.
The country has been darkened by a murderous hate. It is hard to believe that as the sun goes down, gangs in the forest are preparing to set out not only to murder Europeans, but to burn alive and hack to death their own neighbors and their wives and children.
The Europeans form vigilante groups. Their avowed policy: shoot on sight. Kikuyus are required to live in protected villages, watched over by the loyal Kikuyu Guard, leaving the Mau Mau isolated in the forests. The British Army is deployed into the forests. The Royal Air Force into the skies above them. The Commander-in-Chief, British forces in the Kenya colony, General Sir George Erskine.
16th of October, 1953. We have reached a turning point which is decisive for good or evil. There have been no spectacular battles, but you cannot expect that in the thick jungle. The military operations have met with success.
martial law is strictly enforced. At the height of the rebellion, over 80,000 Kikuyu are held in detention camps. A detainee, Josiah Karaoke.
Solitary confinement was one of the worst experiences of my life. A missionary came to visit me and seemed almost to be crying when he saw me. Later, we were hammered by the riot squad, and 35 detainees were crippled, some permanently. I felt very bitter against Malo, one of the camp officers, nicknamed Mapiga the Hitter. Dipping into my precious funds, I bribed a warder to get me writing materials. I sent letters to Barbara Castle, MP.
Barbara Castle, the opposition Labour MP for Blackburn, part of a vocal group in Britain, increasingly concerned about conduct in the colonies.
I receive letters every day from detainees on these subjects. I have a pile of letters here so deep that I don't know where to store them. In the heart of the British Empire, there is a police state where the rule of law has broken down, where the murders and torture of Africans by Europeans goes unpunished, and where authorities, pledged to enforce justice, regularly connive at its violation.
Criticism of British action has little impact in Kenya. Informers within the Kikuyu community are used to identify Mau Mau sympathizers. Loyal witch doctors are recruited to administer cleansing rituals, overseen by British clergymen.
Do you confess that you have taken the Mau Mau oath? Do you seek forgiveness through the blood of Christ, our Savior? Do you affirm that by the help and grace of God, you will confess the faith of Christ and fight against the world, the flesh, and the devil?
Only when cleansed are the Kikuyu released from detention. In May 1955, Geoffrey Fisher, Archbishop of Canterbury, visits Kenya to commemorate the dead of the loyal Kikuyu Guard.
We started at 8:15 to go to Fort Hall. Lots of barbed wire and tribal guards. Laid the foundation stone of the Martyrs Memorial Church. 5,000 Kikuyu were there. I said, I address you as my friends. Whether in your heart you are my friends or not, only God can tell. After, I walked round the square. When I greeted the crowds, they waved eagerly. I estimated 10% loyal, 20% more inclined to be than not, 50% more inclined to Mau Mau than not, 10 to 20% Mau Mau at heart. What a day.
Over 2,000 people loyal to British rule in Kenya died during the Mau Mau rebellion, including 95 Europeans. Mau Mau deaths total more than 11,000. During mass trials, 1,000 detainees are executed. But the harsh regime coincides with land reforms for Kikuyu farmers and political reforms for all Africans in Kenya. By 1956, the Mau Mau rebellion is over, but the cry for independence is being heard throughout Africa. Nigeria, 1943. Britain's largest colony in Africa. The tin mines of the Jos Plateau. The harsh reality of empire. Michael Gratian, an education officer.
The local tribe, the Pilgani, are a fine body of people. Their only dress is a bunch of leaves worn fore and aft. These, I am told, are changed every day, and there are various fashions in type of leaf and in the arrangement.
When supplies of tin from the Far East had disappeared after the Japanese occupation in 1942, the British had begun to use the Pilgani as forced labor to extract the vital deposits. The use of forced labor causes grave concern in Britain. Answers are demanded in the House of Commons. Colonel George Stanley, Secretary of State for the Colonies, March 1943.
The number of workers employed in the Nigerian tin mines is 14,098. While the conditions cannot be regarded as entirely satisfactory, due to the attempt to attain the maximum production of tin, it has recently been decided to award a bonus of 4 shillings a month to all mine workers.
Britain's policy for the empire in Africa after the Second World War had planned for a gradual move to independence, but only after 20 to 30 years. However, as in Kenya, impatience with British rule is growing in West Africa. The nationalist leader of the Gold Coast, Kwame Nkrumah.
Despite fine sentiments trumpeted from the housetops by imperialists, the empire is nothing but the enslavement of one country by another. The Gold Coast is an enslaved country. We must rid ourselves of the paralyzing grip of imperialist power.
Britain's ability to resist nationalist demands is diminishing rapidly. The huge costs of containing the emergencies in Malaya and Kenya have undermined Britain's finances. Then, in November 1956, Britain engages in a futile military adventure. Suez.
Forces are massing for a landing in the Suez Canal zone.
Dr. Edith Summerskill, Labour MP.
We went into Egypt as a great power in 1882 and told them that we were only going to stay there temporarily. Here we see now, as we speak, bombers going over the small towns of Egypt and intimidating the inhabitants. And I listened into the radio just now, and we were being told how wonderful it was that we were managing to intimidate a little country whose only source of wealth is one river and one canal.
The attempt to hold on to the Suez Canal against Egyptian claims ends within days in an embarrassing retreat. The United States refuses to support Britain's position. Britain's imperial might passes into history. Almost simultaneously, it is announced that independence for the Gold Coast will follow within a year. Kwame Nkrumah, the first Prime Minister of a newly named Ghana.
There is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that, after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs.
The end of British rule in Ghana becomes the first of a succession of Independence Day celebrations across Africa. Britain's Prime Minister, Sir Harold Macmillan, on tour in Africa in 1960.
We have seen the awakening of national consciousness in peoples who have for centuries lived in dependence upon some other power. The wind of change is blowing through this continent. And whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact.
Between 1957 and 1968, 12 colonies of the British Empire in Africa will become independent. In 1963, it's Kenya's turn. Jomo Kenyatta, freed from detention, is Kenya's new leader.
This is one of the happiest days of my life.
British journalist James Cameron witnesses Kenya's independence celebrations.
The Europeans, who once declared that the solution to Kenya's problems could best be found in the public hanging of Mr. Kenyatta, are now insisting things will be all right as long as nothing happens to Jomo. Kenya is about to find, as all her predecessors have found, that the miracle of freedom creates as many problems as it solves.
As for Britain, it is left to come to terms with the end of empire. Former US Secretary of State, Dean Acheson.
Great Britain has lost an empire and has not yet found a role. A role as the head of a commonwealth which has no strength is about played out. Great Britain, attempting to work alone between the United States and Russia, conducts policy as weak as its military power. Her Majesty's government is now attempting to enter Europe. Wisely, in my opinion.